Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Unsustainable Wednesdays, and Brandon's had a few drinks before this, so this should be a very raucous episode.
No,
If you like hot takes, Brandon's going to come with all of them today.
It's going to be a very tired take. My son was up quite a bit last night, and couple that with a few drinks, and it's going to be a long night. By the way, I'm recording this at 11:30 Eastern, which is usually later than I stay up these days because I'm an old man.
So let's, you know what? Usually we jump into Unsustainably High, right? That's the usual place. But I think it makes sense. And I know there's a game going on right now while we're recording this. But let's talk about the Taylor Hall situation really quick before getting into the episode, because I think a lot of people want to know our takes on that. And so there's a lot of players that are affected by this. Derek Stepan down to the third line, as if
Derek
Stepan was highly owned.
Nobody cared.
Yep. There's a second line now of, is it Nick? I think it's Nick Schmaltz, Carl Soderberg, and Clayton Keller.
That's it.
And the top line that everyone is buzzing about is Phil Kessel, Christian Dvorak, and Taylor Hall.
Makes sense. Dvorak is the only center on that team that can win draws. He's actually the best faceoff guy in the league right now. Like over enough games played. I'm not sure what the cutoff is, but he's like 58% on the season, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Ryan O'Reilly numbers.
Wow, that's impressive. I mean, I picked him up. I dropped Pierre-Luc Dubois for him in my points league. I think I'm going to try to grab him in one of my Cats leagues as well, Christian Dvorak, and just see what happens, because he's also playing top power play, which is what matters. If he would have only been on an even strength line with Taylor Hall, I wouldn't have cared as much. But there it is.
I missed him in every league that I went after him, and I missed him, so I'm hoping he's just terrible.
Yeah, that would be the hope in the ones that you missed, of course. But what about Taylor Hall? Because we talked about this last time, and some people have said, we're being too rough on Arizona. And I think we need to make a quick distinction here that when we talk about Arizona, and we talk poorly of them, we're not talking that they themselves are bad. They're top of the Pacific. They've been playing really well. But from a fantasy perspective, they're a terrible team.
Yep.
They're like the Isles of last year. Mm-hmm. They're virtually exactly a carbon copy of the Isles of last year. Fantastic save percentage, extremely low shooting percentage.
Yeah, and
it's a dangerous game to play.
I mean, you look at their team. Like, I honestly don't believe they have a true number one center right now. Yep. They've got like 3 centers that are floating between a second and third line, in my opinion. And then they've got, and Nick Schmaltz, I don't even know why anybody plays him center anymore. He can't take draws. He's like a 38% career. Like, why is he centering anybody? But I mean, I think with Arizona, the hope would be that Barrett Hayton becomes a true number one center eventually. But I was confused by this trade, I'll be honest. I thought if Arizona's going to make this deal for Hall, they somehow locked him up to a long-term deal, because why would they pay a first and Nick Merkley and some other pieces and a conditional, which is probably going to be I don't know. It's hard to say. It'll be the third, second, or first in 2021 for a rental when they're not really a cup contender this season. It seemed weird to me, unless they, had already kind of made some off the table conversations with Hall about how he's probably going to be signing, similar to the Vegas Stone deal. But I mean, I don't know. I don't see why they rent him at that. I don't. And if I'm Hall, if you're Taylor Hall, Arizona's probably not going to be paying you the most, because they're not exactly a rich team. And they might be, contenders soon. I can't imagine they are now, despite how well they are, how good they are defensively. So if you're Taylor Hall, why would you once again play for a team where there's no like elite center to guide you? Not necessarily guide you, but to support Hall. He went from Edmonton when Edmonton had nobody, and then he moved over to Jersey, who, they got Heischer, which great, but he's not there yet. Hughes isn't there yet. Now he moves to Arizona, another team that just doesn't have a center for him, really. It feels, for how good Hall is, man, has he been on some bad teams offensively anyway.
What's really interesting with Taylor Hall to me from a fantasy perspective is I think this hurts him quite a bit. I'm definitely significantly, and on top of that, Arizona has a terrible playoff schedule. I know I just said like a week ago that it's too early to start looking at playoff schedules, but Arizona has one of the worst, and it's not close. And that's something that I don't really like that much about Taylor Hall. And I think you really got to pay attention to what he's doing right now. Him and Phil Kessel at the moment of recording this are leading the team in time on ice, but he only has one shot. And that's kind of the Arizona game, right? Win with low amounts of shots, low shooting percentage, and get by with great defense and goaltending. And that hurts that hurts Phil Kessel. Obviously, it already has hurt Phil Kessel, and also hurts Taylor Hall. And I think that overall, we're going to see a decrease in Taylor Hall's value. And look, you can point. I think the counter everyone has made is that he went to Jersey, and in the year the Jersey was bad, Taylor Hall won the Hart. Right? That's the defense everyone has for Taylor Hall is, oh, well, he's already done this. He went to a crappy team. And granted, Arizona's not a crappy team, right? They are top of the Pacific, but the structure is not that fantastic for him, at least from a fantasy perspective. And he went and did that in Jersey. But that was an anomaly. That was a big anomaly year for Taylor Hall. That wasn't like that. What we're seeing now, and I think what we've seen this year from Taylor Hall and the Devils, is I think that year is not indicative of who Taylor Hall is. I think that was a lucky year. And now we're seeing Taylor Hall, who he really is, and he just isn't that Hart-winning year. And I think you said this offline, but the Hart is not that big of a thing to worry about, especially from a fantasy perspective.
It's not the Art Ross.
No, I want the Art Ross player. I don't want the Hart player. I don't care if someone wins a Hart. I know that the Hart is usually tied to points and all that, right? But I want the Art Ross guy. So yeah, I'd say, in my opinion, net negative for Taylor Hall. I think a net positive. And oh wait, one other thing I wanted to say actually, because I've seen this take a lot as well, is that Arizona's power play is going to get significantly better. I don't buy that. Arizona already has a good power play, and I get it because a lot of people are like, oh well, Kessel's struggling, Keller's struggling, so how is it good? But it's good for 10th in the league. Arizona has the 10th best power play, and it's the most sustainable of them all, pretty much. Everyone above them are insane. You have Tampa, Edmonton with like these 30-something% success rates. And then you have Arizona, who's doing actually all the right things. So I don't see them doing much better than they are now. I think what you've been seeing from Arizona is what you're going to get, and it's not that valuable. So yeah, I think my net take is I think that this is a bad move from a fantasy perspective for Taylor Hall. And I mean, I hope I'm wrong because I own Taylor Hall, but I think that's the case.
So I'll make this short, but I basically think it's a push. I think as far as the targets that were out there for Hall, Arizona is the worst possible from a fantasy perspective. It just doesn't help him, with the points you've made already. Kind of were the ones I would make about what's going on here. But I actually think that despite the fact that Arizona has such a strong power play, or a above average power play so far, what's happening a lot of times is Arizona's second unit is connecting. And I think that one thing that could be looked forward to is the idea of that top unit connecting more, instead of needing to fall back to the second unit. So yes, Arizona's power play is very strong, but it's not necessarily their first power play that's doing it like you see on some of the other strong teams. So there's that, but I mean, do I expect it to be a better power play than the Devils? I don't know. Is OEL really a good power play quarterback? I don't think so anymore. I used to. I hoped for it. At this point, I would rather see Chychrun top power play. But I don't know. I've had a thing for Chicken forever, so maybe that's just
how about this
thinking.
question? So Taylor Hall, before he got moved, was on a 68-point pace.
Yeah,
with the Devils. Do you think that his pace is going to improve, stay the same, or get worse?
Well, I think regardless where he was, his pace would have improved slightly. I don't think I saw him as a 90-plus guy, but I think his pace being 75 to 80 is fairly reasonable, but that's not a huge jump from 68, all things considered. Like, it's still within, like, if he ended the season with 68, I'd be like, all right. Like, I'm not totally surprised by that at this point anyway.
Yeah, that's my take too. I think he is. I think I'm going to recalibrate in my head that he's at best probably a 75 guy this year.
I'd say at best 80 for me, like at a pace rest of the season. But yeah, I'm not seeing him above point per game, especially not in Arizona, who just that's not how they play.
Okay, and now let's move into Unsustainably High, finally, after that discussion. But I think it was very important to do that. We were going to do an emergency episode, but didn't get around to it. So therefore, just stick it at the beginning of this. So let's get into Unsustainably High. My first one is an obvious one in Eric Stahl. Center, 30% owned.
As well.
An insane 30% shooting over his last 4 games. Wait, 80.
80.
80%.
Yeah.
80%. It gets worse. I forgot that it was 80. The 8, 8 and 3 kind of look a little bit similar sometimes.
Do they?
Has that ever happened to you? Yeah, they kind of do, Like you just cut off a little piece of the 8 and it's a 3. There you go. That's a fact. So 80% shooting over the last 4 games, that's when people started to pick him up. So when it comes to Eric Staal, I'm going to focus mostly on just these last 4 games because that's when a lot of people started to pick him up and pay attention to Eric Staal. 30% shooting over the last 14 days. Now, granted, a lot of that has to do with he just had an 80% week, so that brings up his last 14-day average, right? His power play percentage is also really low over the last 4, which is disappointing. It's only 33% of the Minnesota Wild's power play time, and that's not high enough. I'd want that to be higher. So all this crazy shooting is mostly coming on even strength points, and his on-ice shooting percentage for the week was 30%. So just all around, Eric Staal had a ridiculous week, and quite frankly, personally, I don't really see any value in owning him at the moment, and there's other people I'd rather grab with, I think, higher ceilings and that are more sustainable than Eric Staal.
Yeah, I agree. His on ice shooting percentage has been 30% or above for 2 weeks now. Even over the last full month, he's at 20%. It's to hear an on ice shooting percentage. This is Nick Schmaltz all over again, who has finally come down to earth. If you haven't realized that yet, it's funny that we mentioned, but he did get an assist tonight, so we'll see how that goes. But Staal, aging player, reduced ice time, which is continuing to reduce as these days go on, even with his good play. He's on the way out, and I basically, when I look at Eric Staal, I'm not seeing nothing that I'm seeing shows me a player that should be above a 50-point pace rest of the season. He looks like he's finishing his career, despite the fact that he's playing so well lately, luckily or not. All right, my first one, although I had Staal as well, is Tyler Toffoli. Left wing, right wing, 14%.
I can't believe you used to say his name like that. Brandon, if you're kind of newer to the podcast, Brandon had this stretch of like 3 weeks where Toffoli was relevant, and Brandon called him Toffoli and was supremely confident that it was pronounced Toffoli.
I wasn't confident that he was pronounced that way. I just couldn't get myself to say it the right way. It couldn't be done. I couldn't.
And yet,
you would say it the right way, and I'd be like, yes. And then we'd move on, and then I would say it again. And anyway, Tyler Toffoli. You got to assume he's getting traded from LA at some point. But in the meantime, his time on ice is down. It's kind of trending in the same direction as Staal, where it's down on the season from last season, but also down recently as opposed to over the course of this current season. You couple that with his shot production, you see the same thing, which is it's understandable when somebody loses ice time that they also lose shot production. Seeing the same thing with Staal. Toffoli's shot production is dropping. And then we see the same thing where we see this inflated shooting percentage over the last couple of weeks, especially over the last week, an inflated on-ice shooting percentage, an inflated IPP over the last month for no reason. I'll like I do every episode, every Unsustainable, I'll mention the IPP is individual points percentage, which basically is if a goal is scored on the ice, if you are a part of that goal, whether you scored the goal yourself or you have an assist, then that counts for you. If you are not, then it counts against you. So it's a percentage of goals while you're on the ice that you are a part of. An elite player is going to get somewhere between 70-75%-ish. Yeah. Toffoli's at 91% over the last month. He's managing to get in on everything that goes in, which is not sustainable by any stretch of the imagination. And just don't buy. I get that there might be some... In a super deep league, you might want to try to take some weird hedge about when he'll get moved, but I would really not suggest that, even despite his good play lately. It's a house of cards.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. My next guy here is Filip Zadina, who is kind of like the Eli Tolvanen of Detroit Red Wings. Much better, I'd say. But just the hype that is generated anytime he's called up or anytime he's playing, a lot of people just kind of freak out about Filip Zadina. And for good measure, he has a fantastic shot, a great release, very quick. So he is a pretty good sniper. But that being said, he's still just not getting the minutes that I'd like. That's a big thing there. I want his minutes to be higher. And in this past week, 25% shooting of the last 4 games, 25% on ice shooting. And to be fair, he has a very good offensive zone start percentage. His power play percentage is around 48-ish%. So that's actually pretty good given how young he is in his deployment. So I like that. But still, again, I have to go back to those minutes. The minutes need to be higher. If the minutes don't increase, this just isn't sustainable. And of course, when you're shooting at 25%, you have a 25% on-ice shooting percentage, and your minutes are low, you are a prime candidate to decrease. Now, granted, Philip Zadina could be, for example, Jakub Vrana, who ends up earning more ice time and actually kind of grows into his role. And this 25% now becomes sustainable because the volume around him increases, right? And that potentially could happen, but I'm personally not banking on it, especially with Mantha healthy now.
Yeah, I agree. My last one here, as Stahl was taken from me so rudely, is Valery Nichushkin. We've been here. We've just been here. He was a highly touted player for a long time, determined that he's not an NHL player, really. I mean, okay, not an NHL fantasy relevant player anyway. Obviously, he can cut it to an extent, but this last couple of weeks, I'm seeing him get picked up more often recently. And it's kind of the same tale that you hear from a lot of these players that wind up on Unsustainably High. A weirdly high shooting percentage. His is at 20% over the last 30 days, and then 26 or 27% over the last 2 weeks. So you're seeing a bunch of goals come out of him, which of course makes a bunch of tongues wag. So everybody starts getting interested in what's going on with Nichushkin out of nowhere. He doesn't play much in the way of power play, which is unsurprising given Colorado's top power play at this point, with everybody healthy again. You'd think that if he was going to break out, it would have been during all the injuries, but it was Donskoy and Burakovsky that really saw the increased ice time. Nichushkin didn't see anything related to that, really, at least not. I mean, I guess a bit, considering he's. I mean, his increased ice time resulted in like 15 minutes a game on average, which is still nothing special. He basically follows the same lines as Toffoli right now, which a really high IPP, a weirdly high shooting percentage, and then nothing else to back it up. The ice time's not there. The power play percentage, time on ice, is not there. He's another house of cards. Honestly, that's the best way you can describe it. Like, not only is this production going to drop off, he is going to disappear most likely. There will be no points for stretches with the deployment that he has right now, and what things look like given his line and his usage.
My next player is very similar to that, actually, and that's Brandon Saad, left wing, right wing, 11% owned. Playing right now with Jonathan Toews and Dominic Kubalik on what is technically the second line, and he's on the second power play right now. Not a spot for him on the top power play. It's 30% shooting over these last 4 games. Like I said, low power play percentage because he's on that second unit. High-ish on-ice shooting percentage. Not that high, honestly. It's not anything too great. It's like, I think it's 13%, if I remember correctly, which is high, but it's nothing really to concern yourself about. Really, it's the minutes. The minutes are at 17 only. When you also have 30% shooting, you're relying way too much on luck there. And so Brandon Saad, to me, is a player very similar where I think he can fall off the map at any point. And I like his even strength line with Kubalik and Toews, but not at the pace that he's going at. And I'm actually shocked that he's even 11% owned. He shoots decent amounts sometimes when he wants to, but I just don't. I can't see this continuing for Brandon Saad. And like you said, I rudely took Eric Stahl, which means you have no more. So I have one more player here to talk about. That's Jack Eichel. Now, he's not unsustainably high from the he's not unsustainably high from the perspective of like, don't expect this. I think we've been singing praises for Jack Eichel for a few years now, saying he deserves to be a first round pick and people don't take him there. And I've kind of always been waiting for him to break out. So shockingly, he's 99% owned, not 100. How? I don't know. I don't really get that. But yeah, he's 99% owned. Insane week. An insane week. And on the day of recording this, he scored again. So this gets all crazier. He shot at 42% this week, 21% on ice shooting. It's just nuts. He's great on the season, actually, high-ish shooting percentage, but this pace is insane. It's just not, even over the last 30 days, he's been nuts. Now, could he keep it up? Absolutely. Could he keep this ridiculous pace and just keep going crazy? Sure. And to be fair, he is a player that I wouldn't mind betting on. I wouldn't mind betting on a guy like Jack Eichel to be an unsustainable guy who is going to continue to get a ton of points and just have an insane year. I don't mind that. But what I will say is temper expectations a little bit, right? Like if you're making ads or a trade or something, and for example, you're in a points league and you see all these points that Jack Eichel is getting you, don't get too comfortable with them. Because I do think there'll be a stretch where he slows down at some point. And I'm not saying do this, but in most leagues, Eichel is probably a top 5 right now player. I'm not entirely against seeing if you can get a Kucherov or an Ovechkin or one of those people for Jack Eichel. Because as much as I love Jack Eichel, you might be able to get someone slightly better, but it may be a push at that point. Again, like I said, very unsustainably high at the moment, shooting percentage and on-ice shooting percentage perspective-wise, especially given the team he's on. But if there were a player that I'd be happy to bet on that is going to have a ridiculous year, Eichel is one of those.
Yeah, wow, unsustainably high, huh?
Whew. I mean, his shooting percentage and on-ice shooting percentage, the on-ice shooting percentage is the one that more scares me. His shooting percentage of like 20% on the season is just insane. But granted, again, it's one of those things where Eichel's is a shooter. Like, he could be just having a ridiculous year. And last year, he shot at only 9%. That's one thing that gives me pause, is that last year he shot at 9%, and now he's at 20% this year. The on-ice shooting percentage of 15% on the season is what gives me way more pause than the shooting percentage, because it's the Sabres. Mm-hmm. Sabres are not that good of a team. Now, granted, he has Victor Olofsson now, right, who shoots a lot more. But still, I think that if we look at the Sabres so far this season, one thing that I've noticed, and we'll see if this continues, but it seems like they keep playing in waves, which honestly they did last year as well. They just kind of have this ridiculous week of insane shooting percentages and carry that through, and then they just fall back down to earth and like below earth, and then they go back above earth, and then they go back. They're pretty much a gopher. They are pretty much a gopher. They come out of the ground a little bit, breathe that fresh air, and go right back down.
I hate this.
That's pretty much what they are. Yep.
Hate it. Sure do.
How about you take us into unsustainably low then?
Please,
something
God.
People probably will like.
All right, my first one here, and honestly, I think this player could go in either column, and I believe we had him in the other one last week, is Matt Dumba. 73% defense. He's as I almost wanted to put him in sustainably low just because of the reverse jinx that happened with Shea Theodore last week, which I hoped for so badly that if I put him in sustainably low, he would reverse it. And sure enough, he actually got a golden night. So he's 6 points in his last 3 games. Way to go, Shea. Now, Matt, he's doing kind of the same thing, except he doesn't have the shot production to back it up. But what's happening here is he's finally getting more power play 1 looks, thank God. So we're seeing him playing something like 70% recently of the power play, where his norm is to about usually split or so. Unfortunately, his shooting is still down, which is just annoying. And that's kind of the reason, if I were going to put him in sustainably low, it would be because of his shooting. If he can't pick his shooting up, he's in trouble. It's just full stop. But the fact that right now his point pace is 22 is just doesn't make any sense. His IPP, which we already discussed what that means, is 27% on the season. For a defenseman, especially of Matt Dumba's caliber, it should float near 50. So if you just kind of like blindly said, okay, he should have a 50% IPP, you'd be looking at double his point pace, which would put him right in that wheelhouse of where I expect him to be, somewhere between 40 and 45 points. Now, when I came into the season, I drafted in a couple of leagues, actually, Matt Dumba, expecting a 50 to 55 point defenseman with pretty good peripherals. And what I'm getting is a 40 to 45 point defenseman with okay peripherals and increasingly worrying shots. That said, I still don't see a 22 point guy. I still don't see a player that should be dropped in a lot of leagues. I don't know. I mean, maybe he should be dropped in like 10-person leagues, but I feel like he has a spot in most 12-person leagues, despite how poorly he's playing. He did get an assist tonight, so maybe that helps a bit, but he's due for some. It's just a matter of when's he going to get some. For the love of God, please get some more points.
He reminds me a little bit of PK Subban, but with actual points on the table already.
Yeah, and with still having top power, or still having a power play unit to play with, for the love of God.
Yeah. Like, he should be doing better, yet you kind of have to at some point be like, it's just not going to happen this season. That's kind of like Subban. I think I agree with you. Dumba is still unsustainably low. Yeah, and Theodore. He scored today, too.
I know.
Yeah.
We had to play against him last week and lose to him in a points league, which felt awesome.
That hurt Brandon's soul.
It made me very mad.
Absolutely hurt Brandon's soul.
His final game put the kibosh on the whole thing.
Yep. Pain.
Not my favorite day.
Moving on to mine, it's JT Miller of the Vancouver Canucks, left wing, right wing, 88% owned. Just a rough week. He's been fine. No goals versus a 15% shooter on the season. 3% on ice shooting for the week versus 11% on the season. His minutes are still really high. His shots are solid. His power play percentage is high. His offensive zone start is healthy. Everything that the way you look at it, it's good. He just had a really, really rough week. So I wouldn't be jumping the gun or anything like that to drop him. Last time we saw this, he went right back to the top line and did fine. So I wouldn't freak out. Short and sweet. Look at that one.
Yeah, it's a Gamby first. My next one is Phil Kessel. Although I don't really need a tool for this one. Left wing, right wing, 77%. There's not a lot to say about this. He's been a little bit better lately, but still not quite where even we expected. And I think we were a little bit more conservative than a lot of the other projectors out there as far as what to expect from Phil Kessel in Arizona. However, you'd have to assume that they're going to play Kessel and Hall together. And that's pretty much the entire basis of what I'm expecting from Kessel. I think that, yes, as you mentioned, the Arizona power play has been good, despite Kessel not being kind of, he still leads the team in power play points at the moment at 11, which is fine, but it's not Kessel levels, which nobody should have expected his, 35 to 40 power play point Kessel-ness that he got over in Pittsburgh, where every piece of that top power play is about as good as you can get. But I do think that having Hall pair with him, both on even strength, assuming they can find chemistry, and on the top power play, is going to help him in both scenarios. And I think that I don't necessarily expect Arizona to turn from a 20% power play team to a 25% power play team. But what I'm surprised about is their effectiveness on that second unit. And I do think that even if they stay a 20% power play team, we may see more of that shift towards a stacked top unit. I mean, stacked. I don't know. I mean, at least it has Hall and Kessel on it, but I still think the rest of the pieces are pretty interchangeable. With OEL, you could swap them with Chicken pretty easily. You've got Dvorak, Stepan, you've got Schmaltz. You've got a lot of options to fill out that top unit. But regardless, you'd expect that Hall and Kessel will be played quite a bit, or as much as possible on that top unit, regardless who fills it out. And I would hope that would equate to more power play points among those two, even if it doesn't necessarily shift the overall power play percentage of the team. And that's where I'm hoping that we see an increase for Kessel. If it's not super spectacular, maybe it gets closer to that 70-point pace we were expecting.
I gotta say, I completely disagree with you.
Oh, here we go.
I think he's still sustainably low. I don't care that Hall's there.
Why?
I think that because the problem is, like I said when we were talking about Taylor Hall, I think this is an Arizona problem. Arizona is not a system for offensive players to flourish. When you look at what Kessel's struggling in, his shooting percentage is fine. His on-ice shooting percentage, granted, is a little bit lower, but that's kind of a whole Arizona thing. Like, Arizona in general has low shooting percentages, and so inherently you're going to have lower on-ice shooting percentages. So yes, Kessel right now at 7 is a little bit low, but what is it going to go up to? 8 or 9? That's what Arizona's numbers are. That's pretty much the on-ice shooting percentage. So he doesn't have much room to improve there.
Well, 8 or 9 would give him, 20 to 25% more points. It's not insignificant.
It's not insignificant, but I mean, I still think you're looking at a 55, 60-point guy. And that's it. Like, not that consistent. I mean, right now his shooting percentage, like I said, is fine. His shots are way down. I would assume Taylor Hall's shots are going to come down too.
His shots aren't
And the
that far
problem,
down. He's never been a big shooter,
I mean,
but
they're down. They're down.
7%. It's not that big a deal.
That's on the season, which is 199 shot pace.
Yeah, but
If you
his
look at the
last
last
week
30
they've been
days,
down, but he hasn't even played with
187.
Hall yet.
I don't know. I think he's sustainably low still. I'm not high on Phil Kessel. Not really that high on Taylor Hall. Again, 70-point guy, right? If that's what I'm saying he is, 70, that's what I think he'll be. 70-point guy. Cool. That's
Good players
but
are
it's not
going to
that
increase the on-ice
fantastic.
shooting percentage. It's the only problem I have with it is I don't think they have a skilled enough center, but at least they have two solid wingers at this point.
To me, Kessel should have. If someone was going to increase the shooting percentage on the Arizona Coyotes, to me, it was going to be Phil Kessel. If not even Phil Kessel can increase the shooting percentage, who, mind you, already, like I said, has a good shooting percentage. If he can't do it, then what the hell? Yeah,
Well, it's
I think
just
this
him
is
doing it. I mean,
I
his
think
shooting
it's an
percentage on the season is
offensive.
only 9, but
He's been better as of late.
yeah, his shooting percentage, but nobody else on his line has. So he's been carrying the line, where
I
Hall
don't know,
hopefully will
man.
help that.
I just don't think we're gonna see more than like 60.
I mean, maybe now, but that's because he started so slowly.
We'll see. I don't know. I'm just not. I am not high on Phil Kessel. We can agree to disagree on that one. But to me, I'd put him still in sustainably low. I would not move that, even though Taylor Hall is there.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, even Dvorak. The only reason I picked up Dvorak was because he has a my worst player, kind of a high ceiling sort of thing. You know, like Phil Kessel's quality, you can replace, in my opinion. Or at least you need to replace quicker because you drafted him as probably more of a 70-point guy. But I digress. Okay, my next one here, after we have a little disagreement, is John Tavares. I love when I do this. I feel like every time I disagree with you, I get to bring up Tavares in some regard. Center, 99% owned. Currently paced for 76 points, but over the last week, he was at 137-point pace. And I know I'm not supposed to say at, but that's what I wrote down. I'm an idiot. Too bad. I think people are too low on him personally, and it's
You
kind of
can say
insane
at pace.
because
You don't want to say pacing.
Okay, cool. That I learned. I think people are just too low on him, and we've gotten a lot of questions about like what to do with John Tavares, and I always shake my head and I'm like, what are you talking about? What to do with John? What do you expect from him? What do you expect from John Tavares? And the thing with him is there is a very wide range of where he can end up. Simply because so much can change, and so much can change with Austin Matthews and that deployment. How do they do that split? How do they do the power play? There's some really, really good signs since Sheldon Keefe took over. His power play percentage is back up to 76%, which is awesome because, of course, Sheldon Keefe likes to run a top power play. That is a top power play. One of the things that is a little bit concerning to me, and it's weird, but it's also an area of improvement for him if it changes. He isn't shooting on the power play. Last year, he had about a shot a game on the power play. This year, he has about half. He has a shot every other game, essentially, on the power play. And so that's one area, like I said, of both concern and improvement. But ultimately, I'd say, look, his minutes are up. His on-ice shooting percentage is actually a tad low. There's a lot of good things here for Tavares. And I think he's going to be, I don't even have to say I think he's going to be fine. He is fine. I just think all the questions are unwarranted, and perhaps people expected a 100-point season out of John Tavares, but I don't think we ever did. And I don't think you should have either when you have Matthews healthy and they're both doing the split. But, I can still see him as a point-per-game guy this year, but I think above that would be semi-foolish to expect. Could it happen? Yes, but I'm not expecting it.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Although I wish I could have disagreed for some reason.
It's because he's a snake.
All right. My last one is William Nylander. Been struggling quite a bit. Only 1 point his last handful, at least 6. But a lot of what I'm seeing is still points to a positive rest of season. His line has not changed. He's still sitting there on top power play, which is the big concern I had with him to start the season. So we still have him playing with Austin Matthews, both on top line and top power play. I was worried that we'd see him bumped, but with the replacement of Babcock, we have seen him play top power play and stay there, regardless who is injured and who is not at this point, which is a good sign. I think I know Janssen is out at the moment, but he's not going to take Nylander's spot on top power play, even with Marner back. If everybody's healthy, I still think we see Marner or Nylander top power play, and I think that is kind of the key difference between what we expected and saw from Nylander last year and what I am expecting at this point from Nylander this year. His shooting and his time on ice and his power play time are all just fine for him anyway. He's never been the world's biggest shooter. He's still not shooting a ton, but over the last 30 days, he's in decent shape, despite the fact the points aren't really coming. We're seeing a kind of goofy on ice shooting percentage, especially lately. Over the last month, he's below 6%, which is way too low, especially given his power play percentage. And I think that's kind of the crux of the issue. Not only is he not being able to score despite his shot attempts, he is not getting his line mates to score. And because of that, we're not really seeing the production that we should see from him. In the last week, that line at even strength has not scored. 0% on ice shooting percentage for that line, which is Nylander, Matthews, Kapanen. So, I don't know. Point your finger who you want to, but for whatever it's worth, I'm not concerned about Nylander, and I've been a pretty staunch Nylander opposer coming into the current deployment for him.
Yeah, especially if Brandon puts Nylander on Unsustainably Low, you know it's real, because Brandon is not Nylander's biggest fan.
It's not even that I'm not his biggest fan. I just feel like too many people are his biggest fan for no reason.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. You know, I have a player very similar to Nylander, actually. That's Alex Ovechkin, left wing 100%.
Very similar.
They're actually very, very similar. He had a very tough week, but he's fine on the season. His shot pace is actually up from last year, which is incredible to see. 0% shooting on the week, lower on the season compared to last year at least. And a lot of that can also be explained away by volume, and that last year he was over-indexed. It's a little bit of both. One is that he increased his volume, so less are going to go in. He's just kind of more of a shoot when I see the net, as opposed to picking his spots just by a little bit, right? Enough to make a difference. On top of that, 15% shooting last year was too high by him and not like his normal self. He's also suffering right now from a low on-ice shooting percentage, so he's not getting in on as many points as you'd like. I don't see him hitting 90 this year. I just don't. But I think 75 to 80 is likely. I think you could see that pretty easily. IPP is also down over the last 30 by quite a bit, so that's one thing to watch. Is you'd like to see him get involved in more points. And so between the on-ice shooting percentage being low and his IPP being low, he's being robbed, or not robbed, but he's just not involved in as many points as you'd like.
Yeah, interesting. I total aside, but I remember at the job we both work at, somebody mentioned that they were very surprised that I projected Marchand above Ovechkin. I feel like outside of the fantasy circle, Ovechkin has this kind of idealistic, godlike figure about him for some reason. He's not going to be the best point scorer. He just never has been, even at the best of times. He's a good goal scorer, as we all know, but as far as overall points, there's going to be better. I do want to clarify. I assume two things. That one, somebody can tell me Nylander just got an assist tonight. Fine. Was not in the stats that I was looking at for the last 3 games. And I assume somebody will mention that Matthews got a point 3 games ago, but apparently Nylander stepped off the ice before that happened. So maybe saying that line didn't get a point was not necessarily truthful, but Nylander was not on the ice when anybody on that line got a point. So there you go. Can I move us into Sustainably High?
Brandon always trying to push a narrative.
Yep.
Man.
Yep. My first Sustainably High player is Brian Rust. Sure is.
I love it.
He is.
I'm mad I missed out on him.
Yeah, I actually have him in a couple of leagues. 49% owned, left wing, right wing. At this point, I think it would actually be a shame if they reduced his role with the return of Crosby. I get that they like to play with that top right wing with Crosby, and that, Hornquist is always in the picture when he's healthy, but I'm not suggesting they play Rust with Crosby. Why would you? You've got Rust playing so well with Malkin right now. Just keep them together. And I actually like the idea of keeping Rust on top power play, even if Hornquist comes back, if you can fit him there. Yeah, I think that makes sense, right? You'd have Gensel, Crosby, Malkin, Rust, Letang. Seems like a pretty good top unit to me, especially considering how well he's played since being given this increased role. He's seeing like defenseman minutes at this time at nearly 23 per game. It's just ridiculous. But he's showing up in every single game. An insane shot pace, a pretty reasonable hit pace. So he's gonna produce there as well. Doing well on the power play. We're not seeing crazy power play time for him, but you talk about how the fact they didn't even put him on the power play last season, and now he's seeing about 50%. That's pretty solid. And his over the last month, his IPP isn't anything crazy. Now he is 100% over the week, but a week is a week. It's kind of hard to really look too much at the stats, especially averages stats over a course of a week. But you go back further, and his IPP is actually fairly low. It's lower than last season at only 55%. Last season he went 62. So to see that go up would make some sense, but probably at the cost of a little bit of on-ice shooting percentage. So I think that what we're seeing from a point pace from him, maybe not totally indicative of what we'll see rest of the season, but to expect something in the 70-point pace, I think is actually reasonable. If he's like above 70-point pace, I think 75 to 80, if he can keep this deployment, even if it's like, let's say it's 19 minutes a game or something, 18 to 19 minutes a game, which is a little bit of a drop from now. If he's willing to shoot this much and get himself into these positions to score, I think he's got a realistic shot at being not only severely underrated, but as close to a quote unquote must own, as much as I hate that topic or that phrase, as can be had for a sub 50% owned guy. But it's to be seen what happens on this team when we do see the return of Crosby and Hornquist.
I'm trying to wrap my head around point per game Brian Rust.
Isn't it weird?
It's just, of all the things I thought we would say at the beginning of the year, that is maybe one of the weirder ones I've heard.
I swear to
And it
God,
feels
every
like
time
not
these
real life.
situations happen, he steps up and then they decide, nah. Whoever gets injured gets healthy again, and it's Rust that takes the hit for some reason. Maybe he's like a hockey relief pitcher, and you can only play him for a couple of games. I don't know. I don't know what the deal is, but for some reason they don't like giving him, that much extended reliance on like actual playtime.
Or he's the Pittsburgh Penguins, Buffalo Sabres gopher, where when someone's injured, he comes up from the ground, does stuff. And then when people come back, they just send them back down under the ground.
I should have just went to bed.
Look at that. Tied it all together. Okay, my first one is Brock Nelson, center left wing, 53% owned, 70-point player, in my opinion, with room for more. He's kind of a little bit like Brian Rust, just a lot more under the radar in terms of just he's having a fantastic season and should be owned in many respects. He's shooting a ton this season. That's the most impressive thing. His shooting percentage is right in line. His on-ice shooting percentage is right in line. The only thing I'd like to be higher is his power play percentage, and that's dipped as of late, as they've started to run a little bit more of like a top unit in the last few days. But all in all, Brock Nelson is impressive as hell so far this season. Very consistent. I think 70 is very, very attainable for him. I don't see that out of the question at all. And I think, like I said, I think there's room for more with a few good above average shooting percentage games, a few above average on-ice shooting percentage games. If he can get a little bit more power play time, you can definitely see him surpass 70.
I don't like his face though.
I think it's just the way they took the picture.
It's not the way, it's just how he looks.
When we went to watch Bob, Brock Nelson looked fine. It's just
you didn't get a close
they
up.
use for. Yeah, I did.
Did you?
I don't know. Maybe I didn't look at him right. I was confused because Mackenzie Weegar looks exactly like Dougie Hamilton, and I couldn't stop staring at Weegar.
Was it Weegar?
I think it was Weegar. One of the defensemen on Florida looked exactly like Dougie Hamilton. It's scary. It's kind of scary.
Was it Matheson?
It was Matheson. Matheson looks just like Dougie Hamilton.
Yeah, he does.
He does. He looks like exactly like it. I told Brandon, and then he was like, no, that's not true. And then he actually looked at it and he was like, oh my God. Fun fact of the day. Okay, well, what's your next sustainably high guy here?
It's Neil Pionk. He's
Yes, love it.
60% owned, which is below some other gems like Charlie McAvoy. Although, how much can I hate on Charlie McAvoy after his last week, where he's just been banging people like a
Seriously.
madman? Ooh, that didn't sound right. But getting a lot of banger stats, and then also getting a bunch of assists. But Neil
Fun
Pionk,
fact about Neil Pionk, by the way,
uh
something that makes him sustainably high. Last year, when there was a Pionk mania, right? If you'll remember that from the podcast last year, I went off on Pionk, said he was going to be amazing. He had this ridiculous game where he had the whole end-to-end goal. Some dude messaged me and told me that they named their horse in Red Dead Redemption after Pionk because of me. And so I said, I don't believe you. Send me a picture. And they actually sent me a picture and they named their horse Neil Pionk. And I don't know why. That was just the funniest thing that one of the funniest things that's ever happened to me from the podcast is someone naming their fake horse Neil Pionk. Because I was crazy about Neil Pionk, it just made my day. And I always, anytime I think of Neil Pionk, I just think of that horse. I don't know if that is actually important for the podcast, but now you know.
I wonder if Neil Pionk the horse died the same way that Neil Pionk's fantasy relevance did last season.
That he was traded away to a different stable.
Anyway, this season, Neil Pionk, he has taken over that top power play with 4 power play points in his last 4 games. He really looks pretty good on it. I don't really see a reason for them to go back to Morrissey, who is not really an offensive player the way that Pionk is touted to be to begin with. So I think that we see Pionk at least take the reins of God, I hate myself now of top power play for an extended period of time at the very least. And he also comes with a pretty reasonable hits and blocks pace on the season. Although I'd like to see a little bit more hits recently as they've dropped off a bit. Actually, still have the blocks, but you know, if that comes at a cost, or if the offense comes at that cost, I think it might be worth it, depending on what you need.
My next one is also a defenseman, and that's Ryan Suter. 54% owned. Did not expect to have him show up on this list this year. Not a 70-point guy, in my opinion, but I think a 50 floor is pretty fine. Rather high ceiling if things go absolutely right compared to other people, and he's somewhat still lowly owned to an extent. Solid IPP, so there's room for improvement there, but he has a high on ice shooting percentage. So because his IPP is slightly low / solid, that can come up a little bit, while his on ice shooting percentage comes down. He stays around the same. If you bring those two in line, I think you still can see 60 on the horizon. He's getting top power play, getting 60 to 70% of the top power play percentage, which is nice, which is good to see. He's a points only guy though. That's it. No peripherals. Like, he will do absolutely nothing else for you. He is a points only guy, and that is it. Which actually makes me surprised that he's 54% owned, because the fact that he does nothing else makes him pretty difficult to roster in most Cats leagues, especially in standard leagues. But if, let's say, you already have all your peripherals kind of lined up through other players, like you have a Brady Kachuk and Vander Kane and all these other guys, and Timo Meyer, whatever, you have all these guys that hit, maybe you just need points. Ryan Suter is not a bad option.
Yeah, I agree with that. My last one here is Linus Ullmark, goalie 30%. Now, I'm not suggesting that he's going to be, a great or a goalie one or something rest of the season, but I think a lot of GMs will be looking for a true starter that might have some reasonable rest of season kind of upside, and I think you might be able to find that in Linus Ullmark. He's clearly taken the number 1 spot in Buffalo. He started something like 4 in a row now, although he did take the loss tonight against Toronto, but I can be forgiven for that, I suppose. I especially like him in volume leagues. If you have saves as a category, being able to find a true starter is always a bit of a boon, and I think that's what we're going to see here with Ullmark.
I'm just going to move right into sustainably low, because I have a goaltender too, and that's Martin Jones.
Oh boy, here he is again.
Again, he gets here, and I picked him up. I owned him for a bit. He had that win streak, which was awesome to have him for, and now he sucks again. And you don't need me to go over stats to tell you how bad Martin Jones is. I think everyone is very, very clearly aware. One of the things that I always say on the podcast is, when you own a player who you could drop and is playing poorly, and you think that he's not going to get picked up, then he's not worth owning. And Martin Jones, to me, is exactly that type of player. Someone who, when hot, is worth it, but you can drop him when he's not, and no one's going to grab him. And if you're willing to pay attention and be patient and just kind of pay attention and see what he's doing and when he's going to get hot, and you want to grab him then cool. There's no reason to roster Martin Jones right now. On top of that, he's losing starts to Dell. The new coach, who I forget the name of, and honestly probably doesn't matter, has said that Dell is going to get some of these next games and that Jones is going to work with Nabokov. So probably not going to start only one of these next 4 games. He's bad. And the Sharks are bad as well, especially defensively. And one of the interesting things is that when you actually do look at the numbers for Martin Jones, he's actually not that different from last year, which is kind of sad. And it's also part of it is on the defense, to be honest. Like, the defense is also not great in front of him. So I'm not completely, putting the blame on him. But still, he is who he was last year. There isn't that much of a difference. His expected goals against per game, virtually the same. His save percentage, really not that different. His goals saved above average per game, almost exactly the same. Mind you, it's in the negatives. But everything is kind of, we're seeing Martin Jones. This is Martin Jones, folks. Look, I think what you see is what you get. Without wins, he is useless.
My next one is Paul Stastny. Or no, my first one, screw it, is Paul Stastny. Center, 25%. He lost his second line center to Chandler Stevenson, who is actually doing well with it. So that's not good news. And the worst thing is that even with it, he wasn't doing much. You couple that with the fact that Paul Stastny gets you nothing in the way of peripherals and never has. Really, if you had Stastny, all you were looking for is points. He's not getting points, and now he no longer has the opportunity to really be able to get points on any reasonable basis. So Paul Stastny still being 25% owned seems high to me. I think he's free to drop in almost every league, unless you're like a very deep points only league, in which case you'd probably be holding him, hoping that he gets promoted to that second line and is able to connect again. But even then, I think a streamer spot is more worth it than Stastny.
Especially given that he's a center.
Yeah.
The deepest position possible. Like, there's no reason to be holding Stastny whatsoever. My next one here is Zach Werenski, defenseman, 60% owned. I know he just came back, but I'm here to advise against holding. He was benefiting from an absurd 17% on-ice shooting before getting injured. It's still a split power play, which sucks, and he has no peripherals whatsoever. There's no reason. He's a poor man's Seth Jones, and Seth Jones is already a poor man's defenseman. Well, from a fantasy perspective, at least. So there's just, I'm actually shocked that he's still 60% owned. I think it's just a name value thing. He reminds me of like a Charlie McAvoy, and just not worth it.
Yeah. I've actually got a defenseman here as well. Colton Parayko.
Yeah. Wait, has he been relevant at all this season? Oh, how owned is he?
54%.
What?
I don't know.
Why?
I don't know.
What in the world? Wow. Okay. Oh, okay. Take it away.
I mean, I don't even know what there's to say. He's okay for peripherals if you have hits and blocks, but he doesn't have like a crazy amount of shots or anything. He obviously isn't getting points. It hasn't for the entire season. He hasn't been getting points. And then he doesn't get much power play time. So even if he was doing something, odds are it's not coming on the power play, which is another knock to everything else that's going on. There's really nothing to be excited about with Colton Parayko. Hits and blocks, kind of, but there's just better. You could just stream somebody like Chirot or Gudas or Borietsky or any of these other guys that play that game better than Parayko does and be fine without him. 54% is an absurd ownership, considering there's no way that percentage of leagues count blocks. And even if they do, most of them don't count blocks as a Cats league. They count them as in points. So I don't know. It's just crazy that he's that owned. He shouldn't be. Drop him.
You're just telling people what they should already know.
Yeah, I know.
That's not fair. That makes our job too easy.
I mean, he is on like a 150 block pace, which is kind of hard to find, but still.
That's true. Still, man. My next one here is Jonas Donskoy, left wing, right wing, 44% owned still. Granted, it's dropping, but 44% is high. For some reason, I logged on to Twitter when I got to California, and there was a lot of Donskoy hype.
Yeah.
And all I thought was, this is all a little too late, folks. Where were you all last week? I saw videos made. So many things on Donskoy. I was like, where was this last week? That's when he was relevant. It's too late now. His minutes are down to 14 and a half. Shot pace is down to 1 a game. Shooting percentage is an absurd 22% on the season, and on-ice shooting percentage is 17% when you look at the last 30 days. And he gets no power play time. Not only is he bolstered up by luck, it was all in this last few weeks when Landeskog and Rantanen were out, and now he's nothing. Now he is nothing.
Yep.
He has gone back down into the gopher hole, never
Stop
to be
it
seen again.
with this gopher metaphor,
Yeah.
where I murder you. And even with them experimenting on that top line, Donskoy is no longer projected to be on it. It's Burakovsky that's still getting kind of the bump, if you
Yep.
want to call it that.
Yeah, and even Burakovsky's down to like
Yeah,
16
it's
minutes.
just
You
no
know,
mas
they're
on either
both-
one of them. But
No, yeah, no mas.
my last one is Ryan Pulock.
What?
Yep. He lost power play 1.
Really?
I think we're going to see a regression
yeah.
back to what we were seeing at the beginning of the season. Although, of course, I put him on here and he puts up an 8-shot, 1-assist game in this dreadful 8-3 loss to Nashville. But 65% feels high. If he's not getting power play 1, I don't see him cracking a 40-point pace. So you're looking at a 30 to 35 point guy. Puts him right in Parayko numbers, really. The difference being that Pulock has a much better chance of actually reclaiming that top power play spot. So I think if you have, I wouldn't own him unless you're in a blocks league, basically. I just think there's better options out there. But he does do reasonably well in blocks, okay in hits, that type of thing. So if you do, if his peripherals benefit you, then, and this is the case for the leagues that I have him in, then he's worth hanging on to with the upside of what happens if he gets back on the top power play again, which should happen, maybe. But otherwise, if you're in a points league or in your league where that doesn't count hits or doesn't count blocks and possibly also doesn't count hits, then I would move on. There's not enough upside to justify holding on to a guy that's going to possibly kind of sink the ship, so to speak.
So pay attention in these next few days, weeks here. We're going to be releasing a Christmas special episode. So what we do is we do this every year, pretty much like in the preseason where we go over every single team. We're doing that again. But we do it in the middle of the season. We recap both takes that we've made, where we were wrong, what to look forward to, who's relevant now, who do we expect to turn it around, everything you could imagine. Like imagine a preseason prep for the season episode, right? This is that all over again. We've done in the past. It's a lot of fun. People enjoy it a lot. So keep an eye out for that. And also be sure to follow us on Twitter, engage with us there. We've been asking a lot of questions to get people to give us player suggestions and whatnot. That's at Fantasy Hockey PD. And other than that, thank you for listening. We will catch you on the weekend preview.
Yep. Thanks for listening.